Alrighty, Rare Petro audience, welcome back to another episode, and you may have noticed that the studio got a little bit of an update, and that's actually thanks to our guest, Jeffrey Can. So not only is he a content expert, but he's the Oilfield tech guru. So thank you for joining us again, Jeffrey.
Just delighted to be here as ever.
Now, if you caught the last episode, you know that this is an Oilfield tech podcast, as I have mentioned already, and we actually made it to accompany this book, Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, which Jeffrey actually wrote. So, of course, you're going to have great content on this podcast, this series, but it's never going to replace this book. It's not too expensive. Go on Amazon, pick yourself up a copy. It is fantastic. But enough of the formalities. I think it's time to get into this week's content. Last week, we talked about cloud computing, and if you follow that figure in the book, we're working our way back. Today is ERP, and I kind of had an idea of what cloud computing was before coming into this series, but Jeffrey, what the hell is enterprise resource planning?
Well, ERP technology is the abbreviation, stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, and it's a category of technologies developed many years ago. I'm going from memory now, but think 1970s, 1980s timeline. And at that time, the history of the technology industry, particularly if you go back into industrial enterprises, is that the first thing you tended to use the technologies to do was to automate the back office, which is the finance function. So this whole range of technology started out helping to support the CFO, do pretty basic stuff like bill people and pay bills and handle purchase orders. Over time, that category of technology has expanded and evolved as those vendors who write that technology or deliver that technology set have added different functionality to their product offering, including creating vertical versions of their products specifically for different industries, and one of which is the oil and gas industry. Most large oil and gas companies these days, particularly the integrated majors who we'd all know, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, all rely on enterprise technology sets to administer and manage a great deal of the functionality of their business where they use these technologies.
All right, that sounds pretty fine and dandy, and wide uses, of course, plenty of applicable situations. But what are the disadvantages? Because everything that we talk about is usually too good to be true in the start. Can you get into both the good and the bad of ERP?
Well, the good of ERP is that for the company who owns one or runs their business with one, is that you have fewer moving parts. You just have one technology set that you rely on to manage as much of your business as you possibly can, which means you don't have to worry about building integrations between, this technology you've chosen to say run maintenance and this technology over here that you've using to pay bills, because frequently your maintenance function is being outsourced to a third party who is now you now need to pay. So rather than having two separate standalone systems that you now have to kind of build an integration for, it's all included within the enterprise set. So that's its principal advantage, is it allows companies to create these end-to-end views, integrated views of their business without having to have these solitudes. Those enterprise tools, because of their nature, create what's called single source of truth. So if you have a single vendor number for a vendor, for your maintenance system where you're handling your maintenance, it's the exact same vendor number that's in the billing system for you to pay the vendor. So you eliminate the potential for these reconciliation problems. This is a very important point in a more digital world, because in a digital world where we want to create simpler, flatter, easier to administer businesses, having single source of truth is really, really important. Some of the disadvantages, though, is that once you've put your business onto one of these platforms, it's devilishly hard to get off of them. So it's a long-term commitment.
Once you're in,
you're
in.
Yeah, I don't know any organizations, none come to mind anyway, that have elected to use one of these enterprise products for the bulk of their business, and then a few years later decide, well, let's go do something different. Like once you're on, because the task of moving your company to use one of these solutions is a pretty heavy lift, and regressing back to some other platform or new platform is really, really hard. A second disadvantage for these platforms is that for any specific thing that you might want to do, they might not be truly at the very, very edge or true best in class or best representative of best practice. You can always find something out there which is a little bit further beyond, further advanced. And so when you're on an enterprise system, you'll always feel perpetually like I'm a little bit behind. But the reality is, when you're kind of using these systems to run your business, it's a bit of a myth, because your real prize is the integration, not the very, very specific edgy bit of functionality that you might value. So the conclusion most large organizations get to is that the benefit of being on a single platform outweighs the opportunity cost of having myriads of little systems which might be very edgy but lack that integration capability.
Alrighty, so it sounds more good than bad, but is this a widely accepted technology, or is this something that's recently been birthed into oil and gas industry? Are there systems that everyday consumers might be using and not actually know?
Oh, and everyone, whether we appreciate it or not, we're all interacting with these tools all the time. Anytime you engage with a business whose function is to supply you with a product or a service, especially a large company, the probability that you are personally be interacting with or having some kind of connection with these enterprise tools is almost 100%. They're that pervasive in the context of large industry. So this is not something you can say, oh, I don't have any personal experience with. You might not have any personal experience in building one of these things or developing it or enhancing it, but you absolutely are interacting with them, whether you appreciate it or not.
So you mentioned that there are a lot of companies making use of this software. Are there a few titans in the industry? Are there one or two people running the big show, or are there plenty of other services from smaller people that are also servicing oil and gas?
This is like many industries. It's a very fragmented industry with lots and lots of players. But the market stratifies into technology sets that are truly enterprise grade for very, very large organizations. And that market is quite small. There are a couple of products that fit that category, if you like. One is a product called SAP, which is a titan from Germany. And a second is Oracle, which is a very, very large company based in California. So these two companies largely share the market. I don't know the proportions of direct market share they might have in large enterprises, but it would be quite significant. Now, by that, I mean, think 60, 70%. There's still lots of organizations who will make do with lower grade technologies because, for whatever reason, they either have not decided that it was time to make the leap, or they can make do with the technology that they have. As an example, in the mid-2000s, roughly, Canada's, I think, second or third largest oil company, Shell, which is a major organization, was running its enterprise system using a technology called J.D. Edwards, which was before it had been purchased by Oracle. Okay. This made it the world's single largest J.D. Edwards installation, but it was not top tier relative to what ExxonMobil was using and Chevron was using and so forth. So it doesn't, these products can stretch and expand beyond their kind of normal boundary. But when you get into the really large organizations, it generally kind of bifurcates into these two products, SAP and Oracle.
Okay, but between those two products, clearly they both have a significant amount of business. Do they afford unique services, or are they relatively the same software, just utilized in different ways?
Well, there's a school of thought that would argue that since you are purchasing these enterprise platforms as a basis to run your business, and everyone else can purchase the exact same platform, then arguably you are not differentiated just because you're using one of these products. But the reality is the products themselves are quite malleable, and some organizations can and decide to use the products to their fullest extent possible, whereas others will simply use bits and pieces. And so to achieve differentiation, when you're buying technology from a third party, arguably is pretty hard to do. But even so, the fact that these technologies offer this huge palette of things that you can do with them creates the opportunity for companies to configure themselves to take full advantage of that palette. And in so doing, they do achieve a significant degree of differentiation.
Okay. And then let's say I'm C-level management and I want to pick between these two. If there is differentiation, is integration going to be as simple as looking at SAP and Oracle and just picking which I think is best suited? Or can there even be some pushback from within the organization, say the goals that I have aligned with implementing this technology?
It may not be so much the implementation, although there is a real question. We can kind of get into that in a second. But I would my experience has been that when it comes to identification of functionality for a specific nuanced user. So imagine a maintenance engineer deep in the bowels of an oil refinery. And that engineer will always find technology solutions that are superior at the very, very edge of functionality to what they can acquire through these enterprise platforms. And so what I found is that when companies are deciding to use these tools, it really does matter on whether or not you say to the team that's going to deploy and use and select these products, whether or not they are to pay attention to the value they get as an enterprise or the specific features they get as an individual user. If the orientation is make my end user as happy as possible, sometimes you'll find these enterprise tools quite wanting because the functionality set might not be as edgy as you can get.
Hmm.
On the other hand, if the important measure is to build and create an enterprise, one culture, one way of doing things, one source of truth, these enterprise tools far outweigh what you can get with all of the other tools that are out there.
All right. What does ERP have the capacity to improve? I mean, in a perfect world, Jeffrey's perfect technology. He takes ERP, he combines it with what to make some beautiful application?
Well, that might not feel this way, but the function of running a back office or the part of an industry which is not in the day-to-day of making things might not feel very dynamic and exciting and attractive. But the reality is most businesses spend a significant amount of money on the functions of what we would call in business overhead. But these tools have the potential to largely eliminate the costs and frictions associated with these overhead functions. And so if I were in an enterprise and I had the option to take one of these tools and leverage them, the thing of beauty that I would be aiming to create is a true paperless business where my supply chain, my human resources function, my finance function, my inventory control, my purchasing, my contracts, my suppliers, that entire chain was largely paper-free, if not exclusively paper-free. And that's the kind of functionality that these enterprise systems can help companies achieve.
I like that dream a whole lot. Sounds like a future I want to be a part of, especially in an office setting. And we've talked about now the future, the present, but I'd like to go a little bit back to the past. You've been
Hmm.
around a little bit longer than me. What were the historical uses of ERP software back then? How were these systems hosted in the past, and are they fully integrated? Did Y2K have anything to do with the history?
Well, these systems originally would have started out as a mainframe systems. So using a mainframe technology or mainframe computers from the likes of IBM and DEC and others many, many, many years ago. That mainframe technology still exists, by the way. That is in and of itself has not gone away. But the industry has moved through several waves of technology change. So we went from mainframes to departmental computers, where we began to the earliest stages of distributed computing. From there, we went into a wave of architecture called client server, which we're still kind of in the midst of, because client server means that you have a desktop computer which is interacting with a server in the background. You've got software on both sides. The software on your desktop is sophisticated. Software on your server is sophisticated. We're in a wave now, which is browser based. So the technology on your tablet, your phone, your desktop computer, you're interacting with cloud services and applications through a browser interface. So we're in this wave of technology change. ERP systems have moved through this entire wave. And there still will be companies out there, very few, but there will be some that are using enterprise systems on a mainframe setting. Some that are using them in client server, and many which are still using them as these days as a browser-based system. What the enterprise technology companies do is they move their technologies over time to match the next generation of technology wave that's coming at them. So the wave that's now here is we move our compute environments to the cloud. So the enterprise vendors have, for the most part, rewritten their systems so that they run entirely on the cloud and not in a computer system you have to have in your back office on premises. And that change, the first time I saw the major shift was during the merger wave, which took place in the late 1990s that created ExxonMobil and BP Amoco. And when these companies were formed, one of the first things they did was hammer together and rationalize their independent enterprise systems, and a major driver of which was the merger, but in addition, the shift in the century date clock, what was called the Y2K problem. That also drove the industry to rationalize these systems, solidify the platform, move on to single versions, and in so doing, advance to the next generation of technology. We're now about to go through a whole new wave of this because the enterprise systems now are ready to embrace the digital world, which includes things like cloud computing, artificial intelligence, blockchain, augmented reality. All of these tools, which we see in the consumer world, are now coming to the enterprise platforms. But to take advantage of them, companies that own these tools will have to migrate to the next generation.
All right, so it sounds like vendors are definitely putting out new technology. People have been making use of it for a while, but there's kind of a big gap between the 90s and 2020. Are there companies who have used the system since maybe the 90s and it hasn't changed all that much? They haven't purchased the newest, most updated software?
There will always be companies who cannot rationalize for at any given point in time the cost and the inconvenience of migrating their technologies onto the more modern versions. That's just a given. Mm-hmm. So within any industry, you'll find that situation.
Is that a majority of people, or is the oil and gas industry rolling with the times right now and staying pretty updated with these ERP systems?
Yeah, generally speaking, the oil and gas industry is where the rest of industry is at with the adoption of these technologies. There will be some which are out front and early adopters and moving very quickly. The vast majority are in the middle, planning and waiting and so forth, and haven't committed. And then there will be a trail of companies who will simply say, "I'm not investing in this. I'm just going to let this one ride." And so there's if you dig into the industry, you're going to be in basically one of those three buckets.
So you did mention how there's plenty of companies making use of this, maybe not that last bucket that you did mention, and I feel bad for them because I like the idea of replacing seemingly mundane and simple tasks, mundane and simple, but maybe long too. Does ERP have any solutions to cover the most boring parts of someone's workday, and which areas in this aspect has the biggest effect for oil and gas?
Well, the enterprise technologies have largely, when they're fully deployed, have largely solved the problems and challenges of what I would call the mundane back office functions of oil and gas: buying things, selling things, paying people, managing contracts. That's largely done. The next wave of this technology, once the next versions are being deployed, will begin to tackle the much more interesting and exciting world of better visualization of data, augmented reality deployments, the use of blockchain. These are the kinds of functionality sets that the industry needs to tackle next. Now, you and I can both look at our jobs day to day and go, well, what part of my job is now boring and dull, which these technologies could support? And a good example is the use of artificial intelligence to do things like piece together certain kinds of routine analysis that we are constantly doing, or interpreting data in such a fashion that it gives us, as the human decision maker, the finite set of choices already sorted and categorized for priority decision making. If that's what's boring and dull for you today, these tools will make that a lot simpler in the future.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you interested, AI, hot topic and potentially an episode in the future. So please make sure you are subscribed to both Jeffrey, PETRO, and we will get you that content. But for the next question, I was going to hash out a few more areas and ask for you to go into specifics, but you kind of blew through that with the last answer. You clearly know what's going on. But one thing I wanted to talk about, HR and talent, human resources. Can we implement ERP to manage mainly the pools of people coming in? And actually, I'll let you take it away. I clearly don't know what's going on with that.
So again, the one of the core functions of these tools is to take the transactions that are routine and executed on a very, very regular basis and move those transactions to a simplified way of execution. And human resources, talent management, and all the functions in HR absolutely applies to this. Everything from recording your travel time, managing your travel expenses, updating your personal data, where, for instance, you have your family has just grown through the addition of some new children, fresh children you've managed to reproduce, and so now you have a new family member. Absolutely. So your personnel records now need to be updated. In the past, those updates had to be done by a human resources professional who would interact with the system. Now that's all done with people using their phone and their tablet. And they're doing all of that in the back end. What's in the back that's managing all that data? An enterprise solution. And so the short answer is yes. This technology has a huge role to play in talent management, and in many oil and gas companies, for sure, already been deployed into that area, because the transactional hassle of paying people and talent management has been ever present with the industry since its inception.
All right. And I'd like to broaden the scope, because so far we've talked a lot from the perspective of industry. Let's zoom out. We've got North America, both United States and Canada. I think we can speak on both of those. But how difficult will it be to get this software to regulatory agencies? Because a lot of the time I'll go to a regulatory website, especially for states in the United States, and it's an old HTML website with dead links, too much content, too much data. Can we implement ERP into local governmental organizations, or is that a transition we likely won't see?
Well, it depends. If you were to divide the function of this regulatory or government agency into the administration of a regulation, in other words, prescribed by law and codified in law, and now we need to somehow administer it, versus the running of the agency itself, hiring people, paying them for a job, subcontracting things to contractors, administering contracts and the like. If you divide the agency into those two parts, this part over here, the running of the agency, is very amenable to enterprise solutions. And indeed, many governments run themselves on these enterprise systems for exactly that purpose. The front end, though, the part you're referring to, compliance with regulations, those regulations are often codified in law. They can be very specific. Like in the US, they can go right down to the county level at times. And it's not economically worthwhile for a large software company to build a very, very specific solution just for a specific regulator to apply a specific law in a very, very narrow situation. That just doesn't, it's just not economically worthwhile. What the ERP vendors have done, however, is they have created things and concepts like an app store, where the foundation of their back office comes from their solution. They have an app store, and they invite third parties to build the compliance software necessary to achieve the goal you've mentioned, measuring compliance or testing compliance. And now you bolt together a front-end app through an app store into back-end enterprise technology in the same way that we all do with our phones on a regular basis. That's how you bridge the gap between a generalized function requirement for a regulator running a regulatory business and the regulator's front end, which is the administration of highly specific laws.
All right. So sounds like you mentioned, they've bridged the gap. They've taken what wasn't available from one side and got tools, maybe a one-way bridge to access that data and technology in more reasonable ways. But back to the company perspective, will automation create any resistance from the teams currently managing this work? I remember you kind of brought up, I don't want to say pessimistic, but a scenario in which the engineer was never pleased with his new companion.
Well, change management in oil and gas is a constant challenge. The industry has to run safely and reliably. none of us as members of society have any tolerance for organizations that are socially unsafe. And so the pressure on those organizations, driven in part by the regulations we talked about, but also by their own cultures, is to run those assets safely, reliably. And that means that they don't change very much. As I remind people, when you're trying to change oil and gas, you're frequently dealing with a jackhammer. You got to go in and tear out steel and cement. So these industries are built to last, and they're not built to change very easily. And this creates a culture and an attitude in oil and gas, which it often comes across as very risk averse and unopen to change. And nothing could be further from the truth. The industry is very open to change. It's constantly changing. But once these assets are put into place and the pressure to keep them safe is so strong, then that turns into a kind of resistance to embracing change. And that is one of the critical challenges that the industry has to work its way through, which is, well, yes, the steel and cement is hard to change, and we want it to run safely, but what parts of the business can change and advance and stay ahead? And that's where it doesn't matter what technology you're implementing, the drive to implement that technology will always encounter individuals who see the world as this kind of black and white. I can't really change this, versus the more digital world, which says some things actually can indeed and should change.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you mentioned that resistance to change. Time and time again, we seem to be talking about that. But it seems like one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest factors for that resistance is non-productive time. Are there ways for companies to implement these systems so there's as little downtime as possible, or to switch and update? Or are some people patching and trying to fix a system for too long that it just renders it useless?
Well, it's you're quite right. There is a penchant amongst companies that buy these technologies. They tend to remember the original implementation that they went through, and for many people that wasn't a great experience because these technologies tend to be, as one executive said to me, they're agenda altering for everybody. Because they touch so many jobs and so much function, so many different job functions, and even the reports you interact with, everything has to change, or has changed, if not 100%, at least to some degree. And people are being paid to do it day to day, and so you come along and you upset all of that. It's very disruptive, and it bothers people a lot. And so there's a real temptation to say, well, rather than embarking on a major wave of overhaul, I'm just going to do a little patch here and a little tweak there. And but it's like a house with once in a while you got to clean out the garage. It's a big job. You put it off until you absolutely can't do it. You just can't deal with it any longer, and then eventually you have to clean out the garage. It's the same thing with these kinds of enterprise tools. Eventually you have to do it.
I like that metaphor because I had to do that moving out, and it did suck to get rid of a lot of that stuff and downsize and clean. But once we had the finished product, it was well worth it. But
well, and in fact, when you think about it, there will be some things in your garage where you have some strong attachment to. You may have built it, or it may have some nostalgic value for you, or it may still be something you occasionally use. My garage has a bicycle mount in it for my SUV. I occasionally plug it onto the SUV, put my bike on it, and I drive off to a far off place to go cycling in the mountains. Most of the time, though, it sits on the floor in the garage because I live in the mountains. I don't have to drive to the mountain. I'm here. I just go out, but I still have the rack. So at some point in the future, I'm going to stare at that rack and go, oh man, it's like a $1,000 rack. Like, do I throw it out or do I keep it? We have a lot of attitude like that in industry, where we go, well, I spent $1,000 or $10 million building.
I'm going to get my use, damn it.
I haven't got all the full use of it. I might use it someday. Why am I throwing it away?
Exactly. How far into the future are these companies looking then? So, of course, you've got your super majors who they clean their garages first. I should probably hop off this metaphor. Don't want to beat it till it's dead, but they get through it first. They implement the technology, everyone follows. But those leaders at the front, how far into the future are they actually looking? Is this just because short-term, 5 years, this can help us? Or are they thinking in time spans of 10, 20, or not so much?
Well, technology changes so rapidly that
Hmm.
the idea that you can plan even 5 years out these days, I think, is a bit of a hard nut to crack for many organizations now. But the industrial leaders are well out when you realize that it takes you, as much as, say, let's say you're in the liquefied natural gas industry, and your ambition is that you're going to turn on a new LNG facility to supply gas to Asia. It's going to take you 7 years from the time where you say, I think there's a market for this, to the time where you can ship gas.
Ooh.
7 years. Your plant, once it's built, will have to last 20 to 25 years to pay off the investment that you put in. So this industry is already well used to staring at investments with an extraordinarily long timeline.
Hmm.
The market leaders are absolutely staring at their technologies and asking the same question. How will this technology evolve in time? And am I using it in a fashion today that is going to make it difficult for me down the road to make future changes? Or is it going to be so far in advance even today that I can't actually make full leverage of it? There's this constant balancing act that they go through. But the market leaders, without question, are staring way down the track, asking themselves, how will this technology be used, and how will it impact my business in the future?
Hmm. And speaking of impacting business, there's typically a lot of people involved. You've got HR, you've got technical people, you've got management, a whole slew of others supporting daily functions. Are there any translation issues across these departments, or is ERP software inherently good at mitigating that?
So there are many ways to implement enterprise technologies. I'll give you an example. You could start off with putting this technology into your finance function. It's disruptive. It requires a lot of effort, and it may, for good reasons, economically limit you at the moment to concentrating your energies there. You put the technology in and you learn. Meanwhile, down the road, you're going to then extend it out into your HR function. But in the course of doing that, you've gotten smarter. How you did it over here might be different how you do it over here. Those differences, once they're implemented, unless you maintain everybody at the same pace as they advance up, you do run the risk that your future deployments will look different from your original deployments just because you're smarter. There's an old rule of thumb that an executive once said to me: when new technologies come out, the temptation is to use them the way we've thought about the past. In other words, we implement the future using yesterday's ideas. We don't use the future ideas. We use yesterday's ideas, but we implement the technology. This often comes across as a very sophisticated technology that's behaving exactly like yesterday's business model. And so we need to break that. But that's a common problem when you get into large deployments of this technology, is that you end up with parts of your business stuck on one way of thinking about it. The next parts of your business are more advanced because they've learned through the process of deploying that they can create quite a different business architecture when they're done.
All right. And then even a step before that, how can management support the implementation of the software? If I'm the tech officer, can they come in, slap down a report, say, Killian, we want you to research ERP software. Here's $50,000. Come back to us Monday with a new system. I mean, of course, it's not that easy, but how can management support the people implementing these systems?
Well, the first thing that management can do is recognize that if they do embark on a deployment of some technology, which is this enterprise level, in other words, it touches every job in the company to one degree or another, is that this is an agenda altering experience for the company. And it has to become one of the top 2 or 3 things the company is going to be doing for the next 2 or 3 years, depending on the scale of your company. By that, it therefore must be driven by executive leadership. If the executives are not uniform, of one mind on the importance of doing this, if they don't treat this as what it is, an agenda altering experience, then the deployment is going to really, really struggle, because the organization will be getting mixed messages around how important it is. There will be backsliding. There will be wait and see attitude by the workers. The project might even have trouble attracting people to want to work on it, because it will look not like a good career move. So for management, if you're going to do this, any of these enterprise tools, the key is to make it a priority. And by that, I mean top 1, 2, or 3. It's got to be named as one of the most important things you're working on. That way, you achieve that executive alignment behind it, and you can then start to drive the agenda to deploy it throughout the organization as an enterprise product, overcoming the objectives and change issues that you encounter.
Mm-hmm. And I love my hypotheticals where I am a successful super major. So I've written one down, going to pitch it to you, hoping to kind of summarize what we've talked about in this podcast.
Sure.
I'm a super major in the same league as Chevron, Exxon, Shell. Let's assume for the sake of the argument also that my quarterly reports were phenomenal and I'm generating a significant revenue somehow. Additionally, I've somehow gotten this far by having all of my departments communicate through various internal databases plural, and spreadsheets to log the massive amount of data that we've collected and organized. Now, my situation may have overcomplicated things and been too difficult, but is adopting an ERP technology impossible at this scale, or just simply difficult? Where does my company begin, and what are the landmarks they want to hit on the way from beginning to end?
If you're in the scenario that you've described, actually is still very, very common today, although not with the very, very large oil companies. They've all kind of moved beyond that. Mm-hmm. But you can imagine a startup company today, something that's a unicorn, has grown very, very rapidly and suddenly is $1 billion in scale. And you look inside and it's all spreadsheets. That is actually extraordinarily common. It's not unusual at all. And it's because the priority for the company, given its financial structure, pressure from investors, a large wave of demand, has moved the organization to invest in the front of the business, selling things and delivery, and much less in administration and back office. Mm-hmm. So this is a very, very common problem, actually. So your scenario is not implausible at all. So where do you begin? Well, first is recognition that this is now a constraint to growth. And it typically is. If your back office costs are rising faster than the growth of your business, that's a sign you've got a problem in your enterprise technology toolkit. If you're unable to scale your business up and while leaving your administration costs largely flat, you've got an enterprise technology problem on your hands because your business is not able to grow correctly, and so recognition is your first hurdle to overcome, and just getting the organization to acknowledge that there's a problem and it needs to be fixed is a significant first challenge to solve. Mm-hmm. Once you've got that, then the next classic move in the industry is you retain outside advisors who have done this before, because it's highly likely in your company, if you've never had to do this, it's highly likely you don't have people on staff whose job was to drive this change agenda because you haven't gone through it. Why would you have those people on board? So the classic move at that point is to hire a handful of individuals who have made this a career specialty, helping organizations with this advance.
So there's no point to reinvent the wheel.
No, absolutely not. You don't need to go and train people internally yet on this. You may be able to hire those folks in or contract them out, get the professional services firm. Even the software vendors themselves have services arms that specialize in doing these sorts of things. So you have to put people in place. They then have to be given budget and a mandate to achieve results. They need to have measures, as you would with any endeavor. Like, what do you want them to achieve? Deployment in 6 months, 9 months, or 2 years. They have to be given some targets to shoot at. And that combination of people and resources with clear accountabilities and targets to shoot at and a way of working, which you contract in from people who've done this before, puts you onto the right track to be able to successfully do a deployment through one of these solutions.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so you kind of targeted management and C-level people with the next question I'd like to ask. I want to talk about how people can better prepare themselves. It sounds like on the upper side, they can know the vision and they can lead the change. But what about the people listening to this podcast who are maybe students, technical personnel? Is this something they want to launch into now or develop differently?
Well, if you're an employee in an organization and you look around and it's just all spreadsheets, and this part of your business hasn't changed very well, and it doesn't react well to change itself, like changing circumstances, and it doesn't seem to grow very easily without adding a lot of people. If that is your business reality, you might be a candidate for one of these technologies. And if you're right in the middle of it, the temptation is to just put your head down and just keep working away on it. Whereas I think in the long run, that's not a very good career plan, because if someone else comes along and reinvents this world with leveraging these tools, you might be at career risk. So the solution for you, in my view, is to be part of the change, not be the victim of the change, and embrace this. And so that might mean things like saying to your boss, I think we should be investing money to fix this. This is inefficient, and it's not how it could be better. That positions you internally as someone who's interested in driving improvements and change. That's a much better career position than someone who is heads down, working away, not paying attention to the broader world out there. Mm-hmm. For students and young people, I don't know whether this is even available in university, but if you have the opportunity to get exposure to these tools in university, or taking some online courses so that you learn these things on your own, that would put you in a much better position for career success down the road.
Hey, I've never personally had the opportunity to do that, but most schools aren't going online, so maybe you yourself could make a pretty penny by establishing a course and giving some people exposure. But for now, what better way to get exposure than picking up a copy of this book? Again, Bits, Bytes, and Barrel. I cannot stress how wonderful this is. Even if you're not looking to specialize and change the way you think, it's a good read to keep yourself in the know. So you can pick it up on, where can they get it? Amazon, other resources online?
It's available on probably 100 websites around the world. But in North America, fastest way to buy it for sure is on Amazon, or potentially through another subset of Amazon sites. The book is print on demand. It's a pure digital product. It doesn't sit on a bookshelf waiting for you to find it in a bookstore. When you place your order, a printer whips into action and prints your copy. And so that's how you buy it, is through an online purchase. If you're not used to buying things on Amazon, well, now's your chance to experiment.
It's time to get with the show. I mean, this is the future. We're living in it, and it's $10. Not expensive. You can get yourself a copy. It's printed on demand, so there's going to be no wasted books. It's environmentally responsible. I can't sell this enough. Again, this podcast is good, but you will never get everything in the book from just listening to us. But I think that does wrap up this episode. So again, thank you, Jeffrey, for joining us.
I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to talk through what is one of my most favorite topics, and that is the enterprise tool set for oil and gas.
Of course. Thanks again. And until we see you next time, everybody, take care.